They called her too heavy to starve. But the mail-order bride learned hunger isn't just about food. What would you do if the world saw your body and decided it told your entire story? If people looked at you and assumed they knew everything about your life, your worth, your hunger? In the harsh Montana Territory of 1893, a woman's value was measured in ways that had nothing to do with her heart. But sometimes the deepest starvation has nothing to do with an empty stomach, and the richest feast is finding someone who sees beyond your surface to the soul beneath. Before we discover how a woman judged by her size found a man starving for exactly what she had to offer, take a moment to support this channel. If you believe that worth isn't measured in pounds and that everyone deserves to be seen for who they truly are, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell us in the comments what hunger means to you beyond physical food. Now, let's travel to the unforgiving mountains of Montana, where two people starving in different ways found unexpected nourishment in each other. Rose Blackwood sat in the cramped stagecoach trying to make herself smaller, a futile effort she'd attempted her entire life. At 28 years old and what society deemed generously proportioned, she'd learned that her body was always the first thing people noticed and usually the only thing they remembered. The advertisement had seemed too good to be true, seeking a woman of substance for companionship and partnership. Must value intellectual conversation and possess a kind heart. Physical appearance is of no consequence to a man who values the soul. It was signed by Dr. Nathaniel Crane, physician and homesteader in Copper Falls, Montana Territory. Rose had written carefully, honestly. She'd mentioned her love of books, her skill with accounts and correspondence, her gentle nature. And yes, she'd mentioned her size, though it pained her to reduce herself to measurements and weight. "I am not a small woman," she'd written. "Society would call me stout, though I prefer to think of myself as solid." Dr. Crane had written back immediately. "Solidity suggests reliability, which I value highly. Your letter demonstrated intelligence and warmth. I believe we would suit well." Now, 3 weeks later and 2,000 miles from her home in Ohio, Rose was beginning to suspect she'd made a terrible mistake. The other passengers had made pointed comments about the coach's springs, about taking up more than her fair share of space. The stage driver had openly complained about the extra weight affecting his horses. She'd endured it all with the same quiet dignity she'd cultivated over years of similar treatment. But inside, the old wounds reopened. The memories of her mother's disappointed sighs, of suitors who'd shown interest until they met her in person, of the whispered, "too heavy to starve" comments meant to be reassuring, but that cut like knives. The coach lurched to a stop in Copper Falls, and Rose gathered her courage along with her carpet bag. The town was small, rough, perched in a valley between towering mountains. The air was thin and cold, even in late spring. "Miss Blackwood?" Rose turned to find a man approaching. He was tall, perhaps 40, with graying hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. His face was thin, almost gaunt, with prominent cheekbones and deep-set eyes that held a haunted quality. He moved with careful deliberation, as if conserving energy. "Dr. Crane?" she asked, extending her hand. He took it, his grip gentle but his hand cold even through her glove. "Please, call me Nathaniel. I'm glad you arrived safely. The journey must have been exhausting." Rose waited for the inevitable, the moment when his eyes would register disappointment, when he'd find some excuse to send her back. It had happened twice before with other arrangements that had fallen through, but Nathaniel simply collected her bag and gestured toward a wagon. "I hope you'll forgive the modest transportation. I don't keep a carriage." As they rode toward his property, Rose studied him covertly. He was thinner than she'd expected, almost painfully so. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, and she noticed how carefully he rationed his movements, as if any excess expenditure of energy might deplete him completely. "Your letters mentioned you're a physician," Rose said. "Do you have a practice in town?" "I did. Nathaniel replied. Before the illness. Now I manage what I can from home. The town has a new doctor, younger and more robust. Illness? He was quiet for a moment. Perhaps we should wait until we reach the house. There are things I need to explain, and I'd prefer to do so properly. The house, when they arrived, was modest but well kept, a timber structure with a stone chimney and a wide porch. Inside, Rose found it surprisingly comfortable. Books lined the walls, medical texts mixed with novels and poetry. A desk sat near the window, papers neatly organized. Nathaniel gestured to a chair. "Please, sit. I'll make coffee. Then we should talk." When he returned with 2 cups, his hands trembled slightly. He noticed her noticing and gave a small, sad smile. "I have consumption," he said simply. "Tuberculosis. I've had it for 2 years. It's why I'm so thin, why I can no longer maintain a full practice. It's also why I placed that advertisement." Rose felt her breath catch. "You're dying." "Slowly. The mountain air helps. Some days are better than others, but yes, eventually." He met her eyes directly. "I should have told you in my letters. It was dishonest not to. If you want to leave, I'll arrange passage back to Ohio tomorrow. I'll cover all expenses." "Why did you bring me here?" Rose asked quietly. "What did you really want from a mail-order bride?" Nathaniel set down his cup. Companionship, conversation, someone to share meals with, to discuss books with, to not be alone with the silence of dying. He paused. "I've been so hungry, Miss Blackwood. Not for food, I can barely eat, but for connection, for someone to see me as a person, not a patient or a tragic case. Your letters showed me someone who understood what it meant to be judged by something you couldn't control." Rose understood then. "You knew I was heavy. I knew people had judged you for it, yes. Your letters, beneath the pleasantries, carried the same weariness mine did, the exhaustion of being reduced to a single trait, whether that's being too fat or too sick." He leaned forward. "I don't need a nurse, Rose. I have medication and I manage my own care. What I need is someone who won't pity me, someone who'll treat me like a living man, not a dying one. And in return, I promise to see you as the intelligent, kind woman your letters revealed, not the body society has taught you to apologize for." Tears pricked Rose's eyes. "Everyone assumes I must eat constantly, that I'm lazy, gluttonous. They don't see the years of trying every diet, every remedy. They don't see how I've starved myself only to gain more weight, how I've made myself sick trying to be smaller." "I know something about bodies that betray us," Nathaniel said softly, "about being trapped in flesh that won't cooperate with what the world demands. Mine wastes away despite my best efforts. Yours holds on despite yours. Neither of us is being punished for moral failings, Rose. We're just people dealing with the bodies we were given." "Why did you really place that advertisement?" Rose asked again, seeing something deeper in his eyes. Nathaniel stood and moved to the window. "Because I'm starving in ways that have nothing to do with food. I'm hungry for intellectual discourse, for someone to read poetry with, for companionship that doesn't revolve around my condition. I'm hungry for laughter, for ordinary domestic life, for someone to share morning coffee with who doesn't count how many breaths I take or watch me for signs of decline." He turned back to her. "And I suspected, from your letters, that you might be hungry too, not for food, but for acceptance, for someone to value your mind and your kindness, for a space where you could exist without constantly defending your right to take up room in the world." Rose felt something crack open in her chest. "I am," she whispered. "I'm so hungry for that. I've been starving for it my entire life." "Then let's feed those hungers," Nathaniel said. "Not with false promises or pretense, but with honesty. I can offer you a home, respect, and genuine companionship. I can't offer you a long marriage or a conventional life, but I can offer you a place where you won't be judged, where your worth isn't measured by your weight." "And what do I offer you?" Rose asked. Exactly what you are. Someone to talk to, someone who sees me as Nathaniel, not as Dr. Crane the consumptive, someone to share this house with who'll bring life back into these rooms. He smiled slightly. And perhaps someone who'll eat the meals I can't finish. The cook I employ makes far too much food, hoping to tempt my appetite. It ends up wasted. You'd be doing me a favor. Rose laughed through her tears. That's the first time anyone's ever said that to me without cruelty attached. They married 3 days later in a simple ceremony with the local minister. Rose wore a dress she'd made herself. One of the few advantages of being skilled with a needle was the ability to create clothes that actually fit. Nathaniel wore his best suit, which hung loose on his frame, and coughed twice during the vows, but his eyes were warm when he looked at her. Their arrangement settled into an unexpected rhythm. Nathaniel worked in the mornings when his energy was highest, seeing a few patients who came to the house for consultations. Rose managed the household accounts, corresponded with medical suppliers, and organized his extensive library. But the true richness of their life together came in the quiet moments. Breakfast became a ritual where they discussed everything from politics to poetry. Nathaniel would eat small portions, and Rose learned not to comment on how little he consumed. In turn, he never commented on how much she ate, never made her feel she should restrict herself. "Tell me about Ohio," Nathaniel said one morning over coffee. Rose described her childhood, her father's dry goods store, her mother's constant disappointment that Rose hadn't inherited her petite frame. She meant well, Rose said, but every meal became a battle, every dress fitting a reminder of my failure to be what she wanted. My father was a physician, too, Nathaniel shared. Brilliant, accomplished. When I developed consumption, he saw it as a personal failure. His son, the doctor who couldn't heal himself. He died before I came to Montana. I think he was ashamed of me. Then he was a fool, Rose said firmly. You're one of the most thoughtful, intelligent men I've ever known. Your illness doesn't diminish that. And anyone who judged you by your size was equally foolish, Nathaniel replied. You have a brilliant mind, Rose. The way you reorganized my medical references alone proved that. And your kindness. He paused. Yesterday, when Mrs. Chen came for her rheumatism treatment, you sat with her for an hour afterward, just listening to her talk about her late husband. That kind of generosity of spirit is worth more than any physical attribute. Rose felt warmth spread through her chest. I've never had someone see me this way. Then everyone else has been blind. One evening, 2 months into their marriage, Rose found Nathaniel in his study, staring at an empty journal. What's that? She asked. I used to write, he said quietly. Medical observations, yes, but also poetry, essays, thoughts. I haven't written anything personal in 2 years. It felt futile somehow, like there was no point in creating when I was dying. Rose sat beside him. But you're not dead yet. And these words, if you write them, they'll outlive you. Isn't that immortality of a sort? Something shifted in his face. I hadn't thought of it that way. Write, Rose encouraged. I'll read whatever you create. Let me be your audience. That night marked a change. Nathaniel began writing again. Medical observations, yes, but also reflections on life, on illness, on finding unexpected joy in limited time. He'd read passages to Rose, and she'd offer her thoughts, her responses. They'd debate and discuss, and Nathaniel's eyes would light up in ways that made him look years younger. In turn, Rose began expressing herself in ways she'd suppressed for years. She'd always loved to sing, but had been told repeatedly that someone her size performing was inappropriate, almost comical. One evening, washing dishes, she began humming, then singing softly. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. Don't stop. Your voice is beautiful. I'm too big to sing, Rose said automatically, the old conditioning surfacing. That's what I was always told. By idiots, Nathaniel replied. Your size has nothing to do with your voice. Sing, Rose. Fill this house with music. God knows it needs it." So she did. She sang while cooking, while cleaning, while sitting on the porch in the evenings. And Nathaniel would listen with obvious pleasure, sometimes joining in with his rougher voice when his breath allowed. They were feeding each other in ways that had nothing to do with food. His hunger for intellectual stimulation was met by her sharp mind and voracious reading. Her hunger for acceptance was met by his consistent refusal to see her as anything but worthy. They were both starving people who'd found unexpected nourishment in each other's company. But not everyone understood their arrangement. Martha Keller, the town busybody, came calling one afternoon under the pretense of charity. She found Rose kneading bread in the kitchen, Nathaniel at the table reading aloud from a medical journal while they discussed a case. "Oh my," Martha said, taking in Rose's size with barely concealed disdain. "Dr. Crane, surely you're not having your, wife do heavy labor in her condition." "What condition?" Rose asked coolly. Martha flushed. "Well, I just assumed. That is, you're rather robust." "I'm making bread because I enjoy it," Rose said, "and because Nathaniel appreciates fresh bread even if he only eats a slice. But surely all that food. Dr. Crane, you must be spending a fortune feeding her." Nathaniel stood, his expression cold. "Mrs. Keller, my wife is none of your concern. Her size is none of your concern. And the state of my finances is certainly none of your concern. If you came here to be charitable, you failed. If you came to gossip, you can leave now." After Martha departed in a huff, Rose sank into a chair. "They all think it. That you're a fool for keeping me. That I'm eating you into poverty." "They think I'm dying and have lost my mind," Nathaniel said, returning to his seat. "They think consumptives are tragic figures to be pitied. Neither of us fits their narratives, Rose. You're supposed to be grateful any man would have you. I'm supposed to be wasting away nobly. The fact that we're actually happy together confuses them." "Are you?" Rose asked quietly. "Happy?" Nathaniel reached across the table and took her hand. "Rose, I spent 2 years waiting to die. Alone, miserable, convinced my life was over even though I was still breathing. These past 3 months with you have been the most alive I've felt since my diagnosis. You've reminded me that living and existing aren't the same thing." "You've done the same for me," Rose said. "I've spent my whole life apologizing for taking up space. You make me feel like I have a right to exist exactly as I am." That night, their marriage shifted into something deeper. Nathaniel held Rose with a tenderness that made her weep, and she held him carefully, aware of his fragility but refusing to treat him like he might break. They were two people starving for touch that wasn't clinical or conditional, and they fed that hunger together. The seasons changed. Nathaniel's condition worsened gradually. More bad days than good, more breathlessness, more weakness. But Rose noticed something remarkable. Even as his body failed, his spirit grew stronger. He wrote prolifically, filling journal after journal. He laughed more. He engaged with life rather than just enduring it. Rose bloomed in different ways. She began teaching reading to several children in town whose parents couldn't afford school. She organized Nathaniel's medical notes into a comprehensive reference that other doctors could use. She sang openly, without apology, her voice carrying through the mountain air. One winter evening, Nathaniel was too weak to leave his bed. Rose brought him soup, which he couldn't eat, and sat beside him, reading aloud from his favorite poetry collection. "Rose," he said when she paused, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I'm not afraid anymore, of dying. I was terrified for 2 years. But now—" He smiled. "Now I feel like I've lived. Really lived. These months with you have been richer than years before. You fed a hunger I didn't even know how to name." Rose felt tears slip down her cheeks. "You did the same for me." "Promise me something," Nathaniel said. "When I'm gone, don't go back to making yourself small. Don't let the world convince you that you're too much. "You're exactly enough, Rose. You're magnificent." "I promise," she whispered. Nathaniel passed away on a clear February morning, Rose holding his hand, his journals stacked on the bedside table, proof that he'd lived, that he'd mattered, that he'd created something lasting. The town expected Rose to leave, to return east, to disappear. Instead, she stayed. She used the inheritance Nathaniel left her to keep the house, to continue his work. She edited his journals and published them as a medical reference guide that became widely used. She kept teaching. She kept singing. And when people whispered about the heavy woman who'd married a dying man, Rose held her head high, because she knew the truth. She and Nathaniel had both been starving, not for food, but for acceptance, for intellectual companionship, for someone to see them as whole people rather than bodies that disappointed. They'd fed each other in ways that had nothing to do with meals. And in doing so, they'd both learned that the deepest hungers have nothing to do with empty stomachs, and the richest feasts are those that nourish the soul. Years later, Rose would stand in front of her students, a dozen children of various sizes and shapes, and tell them something she'd learned from a dying man in the Montana mountains. "Your body is just the house you live in," she'd say. "What matters is what you put into the world from that house. Kindness, intelligence, courage, love, those things have no weight, no size, no measure. And if someone tries to judge you by your flesh rather than your spirit, remember they're the ones who are truly starving. Starving for compassion, for wisdom, for the ability to see what really matters." One student, a girl who was teased for being plump, asked timidly, "But what if they say we're too heavy?" Rose smiled. "Then you tell them you're exactly heavy enough to stay grounded while others float away on empty judgment. You tell them you're exactly heavy enough to hold space for important things. And then you live so fully, so richly, so completely that they can't help but see beyond your size to the person you are." She still missed Nathaniel. She missed their morning conversations, his gentle laughter, the way he'd look at her like she was exactly what he needed. But she carried forward the gift he'd given her: permission to exist without apology, knowledge that worth has nothing to do with weight, understanding that the deepest starvation happens when we're denied acceptance for who we truly are. And every evening, Rose would sing. Her voice would carry through the Montana mountains, full and rich and unashamed. And somewhere, she liked to think, Nathaniel was listening, glad that the woman who'd fed his hunger for companionship had learned to feed her own hunger for a life lived boldly, without shrinking, without apology, exactly as she was. If this story of finding nourishment beyond food and acceptance beyond appearance touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Tell us in the comments about a time when you learned that hunger means something deeper than food. Check out our playlist for more stories that challenge what society tells us about worth and value. Your support helps us share these powerful messages. Thank you for watching, and remember, you're not too much, too heavy, or too anything. You're exactly enough, and the right people will see you and celebrate you exactly as you are.